Oswald was shot in the City Hall basement in Dallas on November 24th, 1963, and the official story says the time he was shot is 11:21 a.m. I say the actual time he was shot was 11:24 a.m. And this is important because the official story time precludes the possibility that Jack Ruby could have sneaked in with a WBAP camera crew, and the actual time would not preclude that. So, if the official story time is right, Ruby could not have come in with the camera crew. And Detective Cutshaw described this camera incident in this report. Cutshaw stated that approximately 5 minutes before Lee Harvey Oswald was brought down to the basement, he noticed a Channel 5 television camera being pushed from the basement lobby into the basement parking area by 3 white males who were bent over pushing on the base of the camera. He stated that the man on the right, which is the right-hand side facing the parking area, was wearing a green shirt, the man in the center was wearing a dark suit, and the man on the left was wearing a black coat which extended to the knees. And then after the shooting, Cutshaw stated he remained at the door looking out into the glass partition and saw 2 men pushing the television camera which had been seen pushed in earlier. He said these men were pushing the camera up the driveway ramp to the hallway leading to the basement lobby, and that he recognized the man with the green shirt and the man wearing the black coat as 2 of the men who had pushed the camera into the basement. Cutshaw said he went back into the basement and stopped these individuals and asked them where the 3rd man was. Cutshaw said they told him there was no 3rd man, and that if a 3rd man helped them push the camera into the basement, they had not been aware of it. Cutshaw noticed the cable of the camera was still wrapped in place and learned from the individuals that they had not been able to get the camera in position and had therefore not used it. Cutshaw stated these men were later questioned by Lieutenant Swain, and so on. So, this camera was brought in by 3 men. This camera was not used when Lee Harvey Oswald was shot, and 2 men left with the camera, the implication being that the 3rd man might be the guy who shot Oswald. And here we can see videotape showing some of this incident where the TV camera is being pushed in. And there's one man walking away from the camera when we get to see it here, who was probably the man with the long coat. And we can see one guy there waves to somebody over on our right-hand side. And that man, I think, is Jack Ruby. And Detective Lowry also noticed the same things that Detective Cutshaw had noticed and said so here in this FBI report. And he went so far as to say that he thought it was Jack Ruby, the man who had been pushing the camera. He was of the opinion Jack Leon Ruby probably entered pertinent area under the pretext of being with the above-mentioned Channel 5 television newsmen. And the Warren Commission was aware of this incident, and they say in their report here, despite Vaughn's denial, the Commission has found no credible evidence to support any other entry route for Jack Ruby. 2 Dallas detectives believe they observed 3 men pushing a WBAP TV camera into the basement minutes before the shooting, while only 2 were with the camera after Oswald had been shot. However, films taken in the basement show the WBAP TV camera being pushed past the detectives by only 2 men. Now that's the video that I showed. And yes, it shows only 2 men pushing at that point, but it does show a man walking away from the camera behind, which would be consistent with what Cutshaw said. The suspicion of the detectives is probably explained by testimony that a 3rd WBAP TV employee ran to help steady the incoming camera as it entered the basement, probably just before the camera became visible on the films. I don't think that makes sense, but I'm not going to get into that. Moreover, since the camera entered the basement close to 4 minutes before the shooting, it is virtually impossible that Ruby could have been in the basement at that time. And this is the key to the timing. And that film is a little less than 4 minutes. That video in complete form. It's a little less than 4 minutes prior to Oswald being shot. So basically the thing is, if Ruby is at the Western Union, if he leaves the Western Union office at 11:17, and apparently he does, there's very good evidence that he left at 11:17, then he could not be that guy with the camera, because that's almost exactly the same time that he left the Western Union office. So that's how the Warren Commission dismisses this incident. But it depends upon the 11:21 time actually being the time that Oswald was shot. And if Oswald was shot at 11:24, then there's enough time for that to be Jack Ruby with the camera crew. Now, according to the Warren Commission report, their support for the shooting time being at 11:21 a.m. depends upon various things. One of them here is the clock visible in the films. This time has been established by observing the time on a clock appearing in motion pictures of Oswald in the basement jail office. And this is the clock in question in the films, and it does seem that this clock does support the 11:21 shooting time. So if I'm right, and Oswald was shot at 11:24, that means this clock is showing the time 3 minutes behind the actual time, either because it just happens to be slow or perhaps for some other reason. And it would take a lot of time for me to demonstrate here how the clock does support the 11:21 time. I mean, obviously, if you look at the clock right here, it looks like it says 11:26 or 11:27. But it's a kind of a complex thing where I use the various films and audio tracks to check it out, and I'm convinced that the clock does support the official story time, and even though I'm not going to show that in this video, I'll just concede the point. And in addition to the clock, they say, the Warren Commission says, that the time of the shooting was established by records giving the time of Oswald's departure from the city jail and the time at which an ambulance was summoned for Oswald. The time of the departure from the city jail, which was just before the shooting, depends upon Patrolman Willie B. Slack, who was the person who noted the time. And when they talked to Slack, he says the time was 11:20. But on December 2nd, months before his Warren Commission testimony, and much more close to the time of the events, about a little more than a week after the event occurred, Slack had said that the time was 11:25 to 11:30 a.m. So he changed his story, and apparently there is a written record which supports the change. But as you can read here, the Warren Commission did not look at that written record and merely relied upon the witness to say that he had looked at it and that it said the right time, that is 11:20, that a time that would support the 11:21 shooting time. So I find this evidence regarding Willie B. Slack here to be very unconvincing. The Warren Commission also uses the radio call slip for the ambulance that was filled out by Mrs. Kaysen, the telephone clerk in the dispatcher's office. But they're not using the original document here, and on this photocopy, for whatever reason, the time card stamp, which comes from a mechanical clock, is absent, and somebody, unknown to Mrs. Kaysen, has written in the time of 11:21 for the call of the ambulance. So even though Mrs. Kaysen seems to have no question in her mind that this is a legitimate document, a photocopy where the clock printed time simply didn't copy, to me it looks like we have a very odd coincidence here where we have a document that doesn't really prove the time, because somebody wrote it in, not Mrs. Kaysen, obviously after the events, and they're not even looking at the original document where there should be a stamp from a time clock. And Mrs. Kaysen also said that she called the ambulance service on the hotline, got them immediately, and told them that Oswald had been shot, and they said they were going to send an ambulance, and they told her they were sending ambulance 607 from the office. But ambulance 607 doesn't say on the radio that he's en route until after 11:24. So she called them at 11:21. I don't think it's going to take him 3 minutes to get on the radio and say he's on the way. She was told he was on the way on the telephone, but the ambulance itself has to get on the radio and say this too. So I think that really Mrs. Kaysen got the message that they needed an ambulance at 11:24, and that the ambulance call went at 11:24, and the ambulance responded on the radio and said he was going at 11:24. But the dispatcher, if we look at the radio traffic here, he's already calling ambulance 605 at 11:21, which is 3 minutes before ambulance 607 is on the radio. So I think what this means, and he explains this away in his Warren Commission testimony, but I think he's lying. I think what this means is that the dispatcher knew there was a plan, and that he was working the plan here, and that he called 605 at the appropriate time for the official story shooting time of 11:21, but Oswald had not yet been shot. And he doesn't say anything about a shooting until 11:24. So anyone listening to the radio might think they're just calling units there to help with the transfer. But when he talks to the Warren Commission, the dispatcher says that he knew that ambulance 605 was downtown. He knew that already, even though you can't tell that from the radio traffic. And therefore he called off ambulance 607 and had 605 come. But I think what this really means is the dispatcher is faking this in real time. He's getting ambulance 605 to come at 11:21 because he knows that Oswald is the fake time of the shooting is going to be 11:21, and they wanted to make it look like that on the radio. So I think this was a sophisticated faking involving the dispatcher and involving Mrs. Kaysen's slip, but not Mrs. Kaysen herself, and also Willie B. Slack. So the Warren Commission presents no credible evidence, really, to support the 11:21 time. We also have this FBI document where these two FBI agents were watching the closed-circuit television feed with Eddie Barker at KRLD, and they said that Oswald was brought out at 11:24 a.m. and shot at 11:25 a.m. And they were watching it live. And we also have this clip from ABC News with Bill Lord narrating. And there's a time clock on this video, and I believe it refers to the time of day in Dallas at the time of the events. That is, it's 11:29 a.m. and 41 seconds and maybe 28 hundredths of a second. But listen to what time Bill Lord says it is.
Got him on the stretcher. It's now 11:24 here in Dallas.
So Bill Lord's clock apparently is 5 minutes slow. Maybe Oswald was shot at 11:26, I don't know. But Bill Lord was probably looking at this clock inside the jail, because that's where he was when he was talking about Oswald being put on the stretcher. And that's the clock that I say was set 3 minutes behind, or maybe 4 minutes behind, or maybe 5 minutes behind. Whatever, it was set behind. So Bill Lord is giving us the wrong time because that clock has the wrong time.
It's now 11:24 here in Dallas.
So I say the actual time of the shooting was 11:24, not 11:21, and that gives Jack Ruby enough time to be with the camera crew when he sneaks into the basement.